We often think of intimacy as something simple, something physical, or maybe emotional. We see it as closeness, affection, a bond between two people. But what if I told you that intimacy runs far deeper than we usually recognize? That beneath the surface of connection lies a powerful force, one that can shape us, transform us, and sometimes even break us? Intimacy doesn't just affect our emotions in the moment, it rewires the mind. It can create powerful attachments, blur the lines between self and other, and expose parts of us we didn't even know existed. And while it has the potential to heal, to bring warmth, and to foster deep connection, it also has the power to wound, to foster dependence, and to leave scars that linger long after the bond is broken. We're going to explore the hidden psychological consequences of being intimate with someone. We'll dive into both the light and the dark sides of human connection, the ways it can elevate us, and the ways it can entangle us in ways we never expected. When most people hear the word intimacy, they immediately think of physical closeness, touch, affection, sex. But intimacy is much more complex, much more layered than just physical contact. At its core, intimacy is about connection. It's the experience of truly being seen and known by another person. And it can happen on multiple levels: emotionally, intellectually, physically, and even spiritually. Emotional intimacy is the ability to share your deepest thoughts, fears, and feelings with someone, without fear of judgment. It's that moment when you're vulnerable, when you let down your walls and allow another person to witness who you really are beneath the surface. Physical intimacy is more than just sex. It's closeness through touch, holding hands, a comforting hug, a reassuring hand on your shoulder. It's about the human need for physical connection, which can be calming, grounding, and healing. Intellectual intimacy happens when two people feel safe to share their ideas, their beliefs, and even their disagreements, without fear of rejection. It's the joy of feeling understood on a cognitive level, when your thoughts resonate with someone else's mind. And then there's spiritual intimacy, a shared sense of purpose or connection to something greater than yourselves. This could be a shared belief system, life philosophy, or even a mutual sense of meaning in life. But why do we crave intimacy so deeply? At a psychological level, humans are wired for connection. We are social beings who need to feel close to others to feel secure and validated. Intimacy provides us with a sense of belonging, safety, and acceptance. It quiets the deep fear of isolation that lies within the human psyche, the fear of being alone, unseen, and unknown. On a deeper level, intimacy allows us to experience wholeness. When we are intimately connected with someone, we often feel more complete, as if the missing pieces of ourselves are momentarily found in another. But this intense longing for connection also makes us vulnerable. And that's where intimacy becomes both beautiful and dangerous. Intimacy isn't just about emotions or thoughts. It's deeply biological. Underneath every close connection we form, a powerful chemical process unfolds in the brain, one that shapes our feelings of attachment, trust, and desire. These chemicals are ancient, hardwired into our species, and they influence us far more than we often realize. When we experience physical intimacy, whether it's holding hands, hugging, or sex, the brain releases a cocktail of neurochemicals. 3 of the most important are oxytocin, dopamine, and vasopressin. Oxytocin is often called the bonding hormone, or the love hormone. It's released during moments of closeness, like physical touch, orgasm, and even during deep emotional conversations. Oxytocin creates feelings of trust, connection, and safety. It encourages bonding between partners and fosters a sense of emotional closeness. In evolutionary terms, oxytocin ensured that human beings would stay connected long enough to form pair bonds and care for their offspring. But today, it plays a similar role in creating attachments, even when we don't intend to. Dopamine is the brain's reward chemical. It's released during pleasurable activities, whether that's sex, physical touch, or even a meaningful conversation. Dopamine creates feelings of pleasure, excitement, and anticipation. It's what makes intimacy feel rewarding, reinforcing our desire to seek out more of it. However, dopamine can also lead to a kind of dependency. We crave the rush of pleasure that intimacy brings, sometimes mistaking it for genuine emotional connection. Then there's vasopressin, another hormone closely linked to long-term bonding, particularly in men. Vasopressin is believed to play a key role in promoting monogamous behaviors and protective instincts toward a partner. It's a chemical that, once released, strengthens attachment and loyalty, sometimes making it difficult to let go of someone, even when the relationship is unhealthy. Together, these chemicals create a powerful neurological cocktail that binds us to the people we're intimate with. Physical closeness, especially sexual intimacy, activates this system in full force. And whether we consciously intend it or not, the body interprets these signals as a sign of deep connection. This is why casual physical intimacy often leads to emotional attachment, even when we tell ourselves we're keeping things casual. The brain doesn't distinguish between a committed relationship and a brief encounter. To the brain, touch means trust, and sex means bond. Understanding the role these chemicals play in intimacy helps us realize why connections can feel so powerful, and why they can be so hard to break, even when logic tells us to walk away. Intimacy has the power to make us feel deeply connected to another person. But sometimes, that sense of closeness isn't entirely real. It's an illusion created by the powerful emotional and chemical responses intimacy triggers in our brains. Physical intimacy, especially sex, often leads us to believe we share a profound emotional connection with someone. The release of oxytocin, dopamine, and vasopressin fosters feelings of trust, safety, and attachment. These sensations can feel so intense, so convincing, that we start to believe we've found someone who truly understands and accepts us on every level. But here's the truth. Physical intimacy can create a false sense of emotional closeness. It tricks the mind into thinking that deep compatibility exists where there may only be physical attraction or sexual chemistry. What feels like genuine emotional connection may simply be the result of hormones flooding the system, making us feel bonded when we barely know the other person beyond the surface. This is why it's so easy to confuse sexual chemistry with true compatibility. The excitement, the passion, the physical pleasure, it all feels so powerful that we convince ourselves there must be something deeper at play. We believe we've found our person, our soulmate, when in reality, we may just be caught in the euphoria of physical connection. And this is where things can become dangerous. When we're riding the chemical high of intimacy, we often overlook red flags. The brain is wired to prioritize bonding and attachment when intimacy is involved, which makes it harder to think critically about the person we're with. We might ignore behaviors we'd usually see as warning signs, disrespect, emotional unavailability, manipulation, because the bond feels too strong to question. We rationalize the inconsistencies, excuse poor treatment, and stay longer than we should. Why? Because the illusion of closeness makes it difficult to distinguish between genuine emotional safety and a bond built purely on physical or chemical attraction. Understanding this psychological trap is crucial. Recognizing when intimacy is blurring our boundaries allows us to take a step back, assess the relationship with clearer eyes, and protect ourselves from falling too deeply into connections that may not be healthy or even real. True intimacy requires something many of us struggle with: vulnerability. To be intimate with another person isn't just about physical closeness. It's about lowering our defenses and allowing someone to see who we really are beneath the surface. Our hopes, our fears, our insecurities, the parts we usually hide from the world. And this act of opening up can be incredibly powerful. Vulnerability is the gateway to genuine connection. When we expose our true selves and are met with understanding and acceptance, it creates a deep, almost unshakable bond. It makes us feel seen, valued, and safe. It's what transforms casual interaction into meaningful connection. But vulnerability is a double-edged sword. When we open ourselves to someone, we give them access not only to our trust, but also to the parts of us that can be hurt. Intimacy exposes our most sensitive areas, the parts we protect most fiercely. And when that openness is met with betrayal, neglect, or rejection, the emotional damage can cut far deeper than if we had never let our guard down at all. This is why the stakes feel so much higher after intimacy. The fear of rejection or abandonment intensifies once we've been vulnerable. We're no longer just risking embarrassment or misunderstanding. We're risking deep emotional wounds. The mind begins to fixate on questions like, what if they leave? What if they don't feel the same way? What if I'm not enough? This anxiety often arises even in stable, healthy relationships, but it can be magnified in situations where the bond isn't secure. For many people, this fear becomes paralyzing. It can lead to clinginess, emotional dependence, or even self-sabotage, acting out of fear rather than trust. We may try to guard ourselves by pulling away emotionally, or conversely, we may cling too tightly, desperate to maintain the connection that makes us feel safe. Understanding that vulnerability is both necessary and risky is key to navigating intimacy in a healthy way. Without vulnerability, true connection can't exist. But with it comes the potential for profound hurt. It's a delicate balance, learning to open up without losing ourselves in the process. Intimacy doesn't just change the way we relate to others, it can fundamentally reshape how we see ourselves. When we become deeply connected to another person, their presence in our lives begins to influence our thoughts, our emotions, and even our identity. Sometimes in ways that empower us, other times in ways that quietly erode who we are. For many people, intimacy can be profoundly affirming. To be desired, accepted, and understood by another person can boost self-esteem and foster a sense of worthiness. When someone sees us and embraces us fully, flaws and all, it can help us see ourselves in a more compassionate light. We feel valued, we feel important, and that validation can make us stronger, more confident versions of ourselves. But there's another side to this. Intimacy can also create emotional dependency. The deep connection and vulnerability that come with closeness can blur the line between who we are as individuals and who we are in relation to another person. We start to define ourselves by the relationship. Our sense of worth becomes tied to how that person perceives us, how they treat us, and whether they stay or leave. This is where the psychological risk of losing yourself in another person becomes real. You may find yourself sacrificing personal interests, values, or boundaries just to maintain the connection. Your world begins to revolve around them, their needs, their opinions, their validation. And little by little, your sense of identity becomes fragmented or diminished. In unhealthy relationships, this loss of self can be especially destructive. People may stay in situations where they are disrespected or devalued because they no longer believe they can exist or matter outside of the connection. They become trapped in a cycle of dependency, mistaking the bond for self-worth. But even in healthy relationships, this challenge can arise. It's easy to become so deeply enmeshed with another person that your sense of individuality fades. The key is awareness, recognizing when the bond enhances your identity and when it threatens to consume it. True intimacy should support your sense of self, not replace it. It should be a place where you can grow into the fullest version of who you are, not shrink to fit someone else's expectations or needs. One of the most complex and painful consequences of intimacy is the creation of trauma bonds, deep emotional attachments that form in toxic, abusive, or dysfunctional relationships. At first glance, it's hard to imagine how someone could feel connected, even addicted, to a person who hurts them. But this paradox lies at the very heart of trauma bonding. In a healthy relationship, intimacy fosters trust, safety, and mutual respect. But in a toxic dynamic, intimacy can be weaponized. The cycle of abuse, whether emotional, psychological, or physical, alternates between moments of cruelty and moments of affection. This creates a powerful psychological trap. The intermittent reinforcement, unpredictable rewards mixed with punishment, intensifies the emotional dependency. Moments of tenderness and connection are followed by periods of pain and betrayal, and the brain becomes wired to seek relief from the suffering through the very person causing it. At a neurochemical level, the same oxytocin, dopamine, and vasopressin that build bonds in healthy relationships are still at work in these unhealthy ones. Every small gesture of kindness, every fleeting moment of affection after conflict, triggers the brain's reward system. It floods us with relief, pleasure, and a false sense of security, making us crave more, even as the cycle repeats. Over time, this creates an intense and often irrational attachment, where the person becomes both the source of pain and the perceived solution to it. This is why trauma bonding is so powerful, and why leaving an unhealthy, intimate relationship can feel almost impossible. The bond is not built on consistent love or respect, but on survival. The highs feel euphoric, and the lows feel devastating. The person trapped in this cycle often clings to the hope that things will return to the good times, while denying or minimizing the abuse. Psychologically, trauma bonding taps into core wounds, such as fear of abandonment, low self-worth, or unresolved childhood trauma. It reinforces a belief that love must be earned through endurance and sacrifice, even at great personal cost. Breaking free from a trauma bond isn't just about walking away. It requires untangling years of conditioned responses, rebuilding a shattered sense of identity, and learning to distinguish between healthy intimacy and emotional manipulation. It demands facing uncomfortable truths about the relationship and about ourselves. But understanding trauma bonding is the first step. Once we recognize the cycle for what it is, we can begin the difficult but necessary process of healing and reclaiming our sense of self. When an intimate connection ends, whether by choice or circumstance, the psychological impact can be far more intense than most people expect. It's not just about losing someone you were close to. It's about the emotional, chemical, and psychological withdrawal that follows. In many ways, it can feel eerily similar to breaking an addiction. During intimacy, the brain becomes accustomed to surges of oxytocin, dopamine, and vasopressin, the chemicals that foster attachment, pleasure, and bonding. When the relationship ends, those neurochemical rewards are suddenly cut off. This creates a kind of emotional withdrawal, where the brain craves the connection it once relied on for emotional regulation and comfort. People often experience intense feelings of emptiness, anxiety, and longing. It's not uncommon to obsess over the person, replay past moments, or even feel physical symptoms of distress. For some, the aftermath also brings guilt, shame, or regret, especially after experiences of casual intimacy or relationships that, in hindsight, felt unaligned with personal values or emotional readiness. You might question your decisions. Why did I let myself get so close? Why did I ignore the red flags? In these moments, people often feel as if they betrayed themselves, giving parts of their body, mind, or heart to someone who didn't truly value them. These feelings can be difficult to process, especially in a culture that often minimizes the emotional consequences of intimacy. Then there are the long-term effects on trust and future relationships. After being hurt or feeling regret, people often build emotional walls to protect themselves. Vulnerability, the very thing that makes intimacy possible, starts to feel dangerous. It becomes harder to open up to someone new, to trust their intentions, or to believe in the possibility of genuine connection without fear of being hurt again. Some individuals swing to extremes, either avoiding intimacy altogether, convincing themselves they don't need anyone, or seeking out shallow connections to protect themselves from getting attached. Others find themselves stuck in patterns of chasing unavailable partners, repeating cycles of attachment and loss without fully understanding why. The truth is, intimacy leaves an imprint. Whether positive or negative, the experience shapes how we see others and how we see ourselves. Healing from the end of intimacy requires more than just time. It involves rebuilding trust, not just in other people, but in your own judgment, your ability to set boundaries, and your worthiness of a healthy, respectful connection. While intimacy can be complex and, at times, painful, It also holds the potential for profound psychological healing and personal growth. When nurtured in a healthy relationship, intimacy becomes a powerful force for emotional well-being and self-actualization. One of the most important benefits of healthy intimacy is the development of a secure attachment. Unlike the anxious or avoidant patterns that can emerge in unhealthy dynamics, secure attachment provides a sense of emotional safety. You feel valued not because you have to earn it or fight for it, but because you are accepted as you are. This secure foundation creates stability in your emotional life. It calms fears of abandonment and quiets the need to constantly prove your worth. In a secure bond, intimacy becomes emotionally healing. It allows old wounds to close because you're no longer stuck in survival mode. Instead of walking on eggshells or fearing rejection, you experience consistency, empathy, and genuine care. Over time, this can rewrite internal narratives shaped by past trauma. The belief that you're unlovable, not enough, or destined to be hurt begins to fade. Beyond healing, healthy intimacy fosters personal growth. In an environment of trust and mutual respect, you are free to explore who you really are. You feel safe taking emotional risks, sharing your dreams, exposing your flaws, expressing your needs, without the fear of ridicule or dismissal. Your partner becomes a mirror reflecting your potential, encouraging you to grow, while still accepting you as you are in the present. One of the deepest psychological rewards of healthy intimacy is the experience of being truly seen and accepted by another human being. It's one of the most profound emotional experiences we can have. To be understood without having to hide. To be loved not for a performance, but for your authentic self. This kind of connection fosters self-acceptance because it confirms, on a deep level, that you are worthy of love, just as you are. When intimacy is rooted in mutual respect, empathy, and honesty, it becomes a source of strength. It doesn't deplete you, it energizes you. It doesn't consume your identity, it helps you discover it. And rather than leaving you feeling empty, healthy intimacy leaves you whole, capable of deeper connections not just with another person, but also with yourself. Intimacy is often thought of as a simple act, something physical, maybe emotional. But as we've explored, it's far more complex and far more powerful than most people realize. It touches the deepest parts of who we are. It rewires our brains through chemicals like oxytocin, dopamine, and vasopressin. It can create intense feelings of closeness and trust, but also illusions that blur boundaries and cloud our judgment. We've seen how intimacy can reshape identity, for better or worse. How it opens us up to vulnerability, the possibility of deep connection, but also the risk of emotional damage. We've looked at the dark side, trauma bonding and unhealthy attachments that can leave people feeling trapped in relationships they know they need to leave but can't seem to escape. And we've also acknowledged the beauty of healthy intimacy, how it fosters secure attachment, emotional healing, personal growth, and the unparalleled reward of being seen, accepted, and loved for who you truly are. But whether intimacy brings healing or harm, one truth remains. Intimacy isn't just about bodies coming together. It's about minds and souls intertwining. And that changes us, whether we want it to or not. The connections we make leave imprints. They shape how we see others and how we see ourselves. That's why it's so important to be mindful of who we allow into our most vulnerable spaces. Intimacy is not something to take lightly. It deserves awareness, intention, and respect, both for ourselves and for those we choose to share it with. Because in the end, who we give ourselves to, emotionally, physically, spiritually, becomes part of our story. Make sure it's a story you're proud to tell.